Good evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 10 of the Dean's Fireside Chat series here at the College of Information Technology at Western Governors University. My name is Dr. Joe Dery. I have the privilege of serving as the Dean of Data Analytics, Computer Science, and Software Engineering. Tonight's episode really means a lot to me. It's all about igniting your analytics passion and coming to appreciate what this powerful career can do for you, those around you, and ultimately the world. Tonight's special guest, Kristen Kehrer, truly represents analytics passion. Professionally, Kristen has provided innovative and practical analytical solutions in the utilities, healthcare, and e-commerce sectors going back to 2010. Alongside her professional accomplishments, she's achieved recognition as a LinkedIn top voice in data science and analytics in 2018. I personally follow Kristen on LinkedIn and love seeing her passion come across in her posts, her recordings, her interviews. And in particular, I really enjoyed her experimentation with using AI to detect school buses, something I personally may need as my 5-year-old son starts kindergarten this fall. Kristen is also an entrepreneur, founding her company Data Moves Me. She's the co-author of Mothers of Data Science, which is available on Amazon right now. And she's previously served as faculty member and subject matter expert at several universities. Kristen, it is an absolute pleasure to have you with us this evening.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Oh, that's awesome. So Kristen, the one question I absolutely love starting with in these fireside chats is what analytics means to you as an individual. And the thing that I love is every time I ask that question to a different person, I get a different response. So I'm really curious, what is analytics to you?
I mean, analytics really is my livelihood since this is just what I do. And but in general, it's analyzing data to find patterns and answer questions. And this can involve statistical methods or some of the more sexy machine learning, and it involves coding, but it's even when you're analyzing pivot tables in Excel, or if you are using something like Adobe Analytics where you're not actually working with raw data, but you're still finding those insights to help the business and help other people. And I think that sometimes Excel can get a bad rap, but I really love to, reiterate and let people know that, the pivot tables in Excel, that is just as much analytics as any of the rest of it is.
Yeah, it's a tool, it's a means to an end. And I remember the first time I learned how to do a VLOOKUP, the amazingness that was, having been something that I actually learned in my first role as a data analyst and not something I learned at college, surprisingly. So I'm curious, that definition of analytics, has it evolved and changed for you? You've been working in the industry since 2010, right? So have you seen an evolution in that, or is it pretty much the same thoughts that you started out with?
Yeah, I mean, it's evolved so much, and I think that some of the main differences are that in 2013, I could get a job I literally found a job on Craigslist. I applied and said, hey, I don't know SQL, but I'm competent. And I had that job in a week and a half. And, today you can't really do that the same way. And things are becoming a lot more specialized. And the work has gotten a lot easier. In 2013, I did a text analysis in Python, and I was stemming the words myself, and things were just a lot more manual. And today I can get to a place where I have results to share just a lot more quickly. And so the job does look a whole lot different than it did 10 or 13 years ago. But it's, still the core is these businesses need answers to the questions that are going to help them drive that bottom line.
Which makes a lot of sense. When I think back to when I first took my first analytics job, I think it was in 2011. And at the time, it was pretty technical. It was more about the data. I remember kicking off SQL queries on a Friday, praying that they would actually complete without an error by Monday morning. And if you came in on Monday morning and there was an error, you went and took a lap around the building to vent a little bit because you knew you had to start over. And we think about today, the ability to query data so much faster, where the technology isn't necessarily a limitation anymore, and really the focus point is it's on the business influence, it's understanding how to affect change, so create change. So to me, that's kind of been the evolution I've noticed, is it was more praying that things would run a decade ago, and now having an opportunity to run things quickly and experiment more frequently, but it's really coming down to driving that ROI and affecting change. But before we get into that, I'd love to talk a little bit about the initial spark that brought you into data analytics. Maybe you could share a little bit about what you were doing before and what inspired you to go with this career path.
Yeah, I mean, so I'm a really pragmatic person. So I think we were just talking before, and I was going to be a professional Irish step dancer, but my parents made me go to college, and I'm first generation college, and my parents thought that if I went for math, that I'd have a lot of opportunities. So I went to school for math, and it wasn't necessarily my choice, but I went and I absolutely fell in love. And then I, after school, struggled a bit to find a job. And after I found a job, I still wasn't making the money that I wanted to make. I knew that there was more out there for me. And I decided to go get a master's degree in statistics, specifically because I saw that it was offering a good amount of money for those roles. And so I did that, and I, again, like, absolutely love statistics, absolutely love math, but that was sort of my start, and I couldn't imagine being anywhere else or doing anywhere else, but doing something else for work. But I absolutely fell into it sort of accident, and now I've been on this just like amazing journey, being able to watch how data has changed over the last 10 or 13 years, because it's absolutely crazy. It's a super exciting time to be in analytics.
So when you get dropped into math and statistics, sometimes that can be intimidating, especially if you may not be coming from a STEM or tech background. And I have to wonder, so you mentioned the Irish step dancing. I know you've done gymnastics in the past, which takes you out of your comfort zone too when you're learning a new move or a new routine, or you may be performing in front of an audience. How do you get through something that's intimidating? Like, what do you personally do when you're taking on a new challenge and diving into something for the first time, as many of our prospective students that are interested in analytics may do?
Yeah, so it's actually been a number of things. I remember I went to a Women in Mathematics conference in 2009, and at the front of the stage, they asked, has anyone here experienced imposter syndrome? And every single person's hand went up. And, it's this opportunity to say, like, okay, I'm not alone. And it's just been over the years seeing other people have the same difficulties that I do. Because anytime you start something new, my first job in 2010, I was a fish out of water. I didn't know how this whole corporate thing worked. It has its own etiquette and the way that we work, and you have to learn all those things. But by just staying and continuing along and being able to watch these different experiences and just knowing that other people struggle with imposter syndrome, other people struggle with, how do I go about approaching my boss with this or that, and really taking that and saying, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not unique. And, being able to step back and say, okay, I'm not going to worry about this too much, because this is normal.
You said something in there that was really interesting, which is, I'm not alone, I'm not unique. And I think one of the things I observed, at least in my career, was a lot of the folks coming into analytics were coming from very diverse backgrounds. Maybe they were a firefighter or a nutritionist, or in my case, I was a bartender before I got into analytics. Maybe that's the reason I like doing fireside chats. You were a dancer. Folks come from all these different experiences and may have actually struggled with some of these things in the past, and it really becomes a leap of faith in some way. And I'm curious, across your career, whether it's as an influencer or as an entrepreneur or getting into analytics, has there been a time when you've taken that leap of faith, and maybe you could tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so again, this is another one where it's been continuous leaps of faith. Like, even my very first job, I was building neural net models in the utility industry and lots of arenas. I was doing econometric time series analysis and forecasting. And I remember calling my mom and saying I was ready to go get a new job. She was like, "You're crazy. They have a pension. They're paying you. Why can't you just be happy and stay?" You know? And so it's not like I had these people behind me that were cheering me on when I went to go get a new job. But, you know, I always was looking for more. How can I improve? What's the next step? You know, and then it's just gotten, the steps have just gotten bigger as I've gone on. So then when I decided to go off on my own, again, that was a very big leap. It was, you know, I built up a couple contracts and I said, okay, I'm going to go work for myself now and I'm going to see how that goes. And just trusting that, especially at that point in my career, and I'm actually an advocate of job hopping. But at that point, I had already had the experience of getting a couple different jobs. So I knew that if I went off on my own and it didn't work, I would be able to get another job and I would be okay.
I think that's incredible, and I think the opportunity to see, again, diversity of perspective, diversity of experience, to be able to build your portfolio, understand the different kinds of curveballs that would be coming at you. It's all a great, you know, combination that really drives value in a lot of ways and brings things to the table. I'm curious, so as we're going through this, you've talked about passion, but there's also the practicality of what we're learning and what we need to apply to these roles, and this may apply across industries, for example, too, right? How do you balance passion and practicality? Because, for example, like I see you on LinkedIn, you're putting out all these videos and these interviews, and you're building new things, and you can see the excitement as you're doing it. But then there's also the notion of you're diving into this, but what is it that the company needs and the role needs, and you're trying to get to that next level. How do you find that balance?
Yeah, and it's definitely a balance. I remember, so we haven't mentioned it, but I interviewed with you for a role at EMC in 2017, and at that point in my career, because my master's degree is in statistics, I had naturally learned R. That's what you learned at the time if you were getting a master's degree in statistics, and I saw the world of analytics moving to Python. You know, and I keep up with those things by looking at the job postings and just sort of trying to keep my finger on the pulse of what sort of skills do you need right now to land an analytics role. You know, and so at that point it became, well, I'm going to learn Python. And I did, and I wasn't like great at it, but I was good enough to get a job. And that's, you know, sort of been a fair amount of what I've done, is being like, okay, this is practical. I need this. I'm going to get this skill. And then I will hone that skill while I'm working. But, you know, I do really keep an eye on, so like generative AI is very big right now. So the other day I posted a video where I built a chatbot using LangChain, and it's a Gradio app. So I'm aware of what is, you know, sort of what the trends are in analytics. At the same time, I sort of have a passion for all of it. And then I do just try and apply that passion where I think it's going to be the most relevant and beneficial.
You know, two things came to mind as you were talking. One is when you were talking about learning Python for the first time, I was remembering learning SAS for the first time. And my mentor at the time in my very first company, she was a SAS advocate. I was an SPSS fan at the time. And I will never go away from SPSS, IBM Modeler and all those things. And she's like, no, try it. She encouraged me. I learned SAS. I ended up loving SAS at the time. This was because I went into R and Python. But again, there's that notion of taking a leap, trusting the folks that are around you, trying something new and adding to your tool belt. The other thing that I'm curious is, so today you're an AI developer advocate. You talk about the power of analytics, finding your passion. We'll talk about your book and other things in a moment. But when did you realize you were going to make that evolution from being a hands-on keyboard data scientist, potentially, to this advocate, someone who's on the soapbox, who's trying to get people to drink the analytics Kool-Aid and get them excited? When did that happen?
Yeah, so I mean, it really started when I took a job in 2018. I started posting on LinkedIn, and that was also a happy accident. I saw a friend posting on LinkedIn, and I was like, "Hey, are you, trying to be popular? What are you doing?" And they were like, "You have to write a blog." And I wrote a blog, I posted it, no one cared. It was about behavioral segmentation using k-means in e-commerce. And then I gave a presentation at Worcester Polytech just about what careers in data look like. And because I had that presentation, I wrote it up in a blog and I posted it and it got popular. And I really started enjoying making friends in the data community, creating content for the data community. And so when I finally learned about what a developer advocate was, which is somebody who helps businesses to spread the word, but you're not necessarily writing as much production level code, or in some cases people are, but I wasn't. I was, creating demos and tutorials and different pieces of content that I could share online with the world, which I had already realized was a really big passion of mine. So when I realized that developer advocacy was actually a role, and I was able to use my data skills and my love of creating content and create a job out of that, it was on. Like that was, I mean, there's like nothing that is a better fit for me than that.
That's incredible. And I think one of the key takeaways I have for that, for those that are listening, you may not find your final destiny or passion right out of the gate. I remember when I first started in analytics, I was a hands-on keyboard programmer. I would code till 3 o'clock in the morning. I never wanted to go into people management. In fact, my first boss at EMC at the time, I used to tell him, I don't want to be a manager, I don't want to be a manager. And over the years, I actually came to realize that it wasn't necessarily the data or the mathematics that I fell in love with. It was actually influencing people to use data to do certain things that they haven't been able to do before, and getting that light bulb to go off and getting on stage to talk about it and get people excited and to be that advocate, to your point. And that played more to my personality and what I wanted to achieve. But that wasn't my first role in analytics. It wasn't my second role in analytics. It wasn't my third role in analytics. I didn't really get to that until I found digital transformation and decision intelligence. But I wouldn't have found those things if I didn't go through a lot of those steps. So for those of you that are thinking about going into analytics that are watching, just remember that it's all stepping stones in that journey to getting to where you want to be. And you may not even realize when you first come into the analytics family where you want to be under that umbrella. And you may change that several times, and that's totally cool. Kristen has done it, I've changed. And now I'm in academia, which is something I knew I eventually wanted to get to, but I didn't know that when I first started out either. So I'd love to transition for a second and talk about data moves me. So in addition to being a hands-on keyboard programmer, being an advocate, you're an entrepreneur. You have so many different feats and accomplishments, Kristen. So what is data moves me? Where did the idea from that come from?
Yeah, so it's definitely evolved over time. At first, it was a lot of freelance data work, consulting. So I did projects for like ButcherBox, where I build them a retention model and then help upskill their team to be able to, understand the coefficients and how to relay that to their stakeholders and how to maintain the model. Nowadays, since I myself have sort of changed the roles and what my passions are and what I'm looking to do, I am actually offering things like, I will create a coding demo for your company and then amplify your brand with that. So tomorrow I have a video going live where I used Zilliz, which is a vector database company, and I did vector similarity search on images that I gathered of my family and compared it using a ResNet 50 model to a ResNet 152 model. And so, my service that I'm, hoping to do more of now is really I will create these demos for you, and then I will post it on LinkedIn. I had already posted twice on LinkedIn for them. The third post goes live tomorrow. It'll also be on Reddit. I have 6,600 email subscribers. And so it's this whole campaign that I'm sort of building for companies, but it's really centered around helping people get their hands on your product and getting people to actually sign up, use it, and write code.
Which is awesome because now this includes hands-on keyboard programming. It involves being an advocate, and it just brings all these different things together. So it almost seems like you've kind of converged into what your passion is with that. Did you ever imagine that you were going to be an entrepreneur one day?
The whole thing is so weird and has felt fluid because, when I was ready to go off on my own the first time, because I did spend a year as a developer advocate as an employee in between. So I did a couple years by myself, a year as a developer advocate, and now I'm working for myself again. It's surprisingly easy to, pay the fee for your state and obtain an LLC. And I've just enjoyed building my own website and crafting my offers and making friends with other people who are building businesses so much that like my life feels pretty fluid now between work and life. It's an honest, obviously there's difficulties or whatever, but there's also things about it that felt out of reach. And I think my message is that starting your own company might be more in your reach than you think.
Yeah, I think it goes back to that taking leaps of faith that we were talking about earlier, and you've now proven that it's doable and possible, and you have a great business there, which we're very proud of you for. And I think for the folks that are watching, again, it's about finding these different opportunities, exploring them, seeing what it does, and seeing if it can help you to really embrace that passion. In your case, get to be your own boss as well, and that's going to take us great into a question on work-life balance I have coming up. But before we move on, though, just a quick thing to the folks that are watching. So if you haven't started asking questions in the chat, you're more than welcome to. As we get closer to the end, we're going to get a chance for Kristen to be able to answer some Q&A as well. So if there's anything that's crossing your mind around her company or her path or analytics in general, please make sure to get those into the chat. So I'd love to pivot back to the LinkedIn Top Voice and that recognition that you received, which is phenomenal. And, congratulations for that. Has that changed anything for you, or is it just given you a bigger megaphone to do what you love?
I mean, so to be completely honest, LinkedIn has changed my life. Like I speak all over the place. I'm going to be speaking on a panel at Big Data London next month. There's just been so many opportunities. It's through getting active on LinkedIn that allowed me to build up a business that would, be big enough that I could go off on my own. It's really changed everything. I get a lot of opportunities in my DMs every week. And so, I'm very grateful. I'm also creating a LinkedIn learning course about sort of AI and the future of work. But yeah, no, it's allowed me to make friends with people with similar passions, which again is huge because like I said, in 2008, 2009 at this Women in Mathematics conference, and, I'm looking around and just thinking like, how do I make friends with other people who have similar passions to me? Because, we were all gonna go home and, and being in math and statistics can be a little lonely. You might have your people that, I don't know, my graduating class for my master's in statistics was only 4 people.
Oh, wow.
And now, all of a sudden on LinkedIn, I have all these friends. Like there's real relationships to be had there. Like I spend a significant amount of my time there. And I really like cherish and value the people that I've met. Like it's enriched my life. It's given me opportunities. Like LinkedIn has absolutely changed my life.
That's phenomenal. That's an awesome story to hear. And I'm curious, because there are probably some folks watching now that are thinking, well, how do I become an influencer? Or how do I get my voice out there? I have something to say. I have something to add. Do you have any advice for somebody who's starting out that really wants to embrace LinkedIn or potentially a different platform to take advantage of that community and those relationships that you talked about?
Yeah. So I think, there's just so many tips here, but I think if you're following people on LinkedIn and you enjoy their content, make it a habit to comment, because there are people that I know now that all they did was comment cool on my posts, and now I know this guy Fred, and like and like I've started to build a relationship with him. And so that's the easiest way to get somebody's attention, is to start commenting on the regular. Start creating your own content. If you actually put yourself out there, maybe your first post won't get any likes. My first article I posted got 7 likes. Like, it wasn't, that I just woke up one day and started posting on LinkedIn and became an overnight sensation. Like, that wasn't the case. But if if you're commenting on other people's stuff, you start to get to know people, you can start tagging them in your posts, and they will probably come and like and comment on it. And then that increases your reach. So now you're in more people's feeds. And then you just want to be thinking about things like the visual aesthetics. So for that, it's really nice to use something like Canva, Canva. I even recommend that for the decks that you're going to make in your analytics work, because it makes it very easy to make really nice visuals with no design background. There's all sorts of tools and tricks that you can use to sort of create really nice looking content, go out and start building relationships. And it's really about consistency. If you just keep showing up, something's going to happen.
There's so much of what you just said that parallels also starting a career in analytics, needing to network, build relationships. And the thing that kept on bouncing around in my head was professional brand. And what is your professional brand? And the folks that know me when I was at EMC know that for a long time I was the math tie guy, Joe, because I wore a calculus tie to a meeting once, which is a whole different story. I can share another. But then there was also, I became Professor Joe at one point, which is also a very limiting brand, because when folks were thinking about the next level role, they were thinking of me as Professor Joe, and I was almost ring-fenced. And it became this whole notion of how do you manage and build your brand, and how your brand can be as powerful, if not more powerful, than even the portfolio of skills that you have. So I'm kind of curious, how has your brand evolved? What do you think about from a brand management perspective as you think about what you represent as this developer advocate?
Yeah, so I like to really be known as somebody who talks about my career and shares about like my real experience modeling, the different things that I've learned along the way. My brand is a little bit more casual than others. If you check out my website, so I'm actually launching a new website maybe Friday or Monday. That'll go live. But my brand has always been a little bit more casual, a little bit sassy maybe. But I'm not the type of person who has been looking to grow in a corporate capacity for a bit now. I've decided that I am just the type of person who's going to be an individual contributor. And so that's one of those things that I also get to think about is, because you do have to balance sort of where do you want to go and how are you going to present that to the world. But, it's also so easy these days to build a website. And so you can build a website. Because sometimes too, if you have, and sorry, I'm going off on a tangent here, but everyone talks about their GitHub as their portfolio, but sometimes somebody wants to look at your portfolio who maybe isn't necessarily going to be a very skilled coder. And so a website is just a fantastic way to be able to show what you've done and be able to speak to it in a way that's sort of visually pleasing and appeals to the masses more than maybe a GitHub would.
And that's a great point. You know, a lot of times with analytics, people are quick to say storytelling is important. And then the comment kind of fades a little bit. So to you, is storytelling this critical element of what analytics encompasses, or is it more of a riff?
Oh, I think storytelling is just so much because it's everywhere. You know, like I'm storytelling in my LinkedIn posts. When I was working in corporate, I was trying to get buy-in to do the cool projects that I wanted to do, you know, like, sure, I'm also storytelling at the end where I'm giving you the executive summary and telling you about the results and telling you about the actionable things that we should do, but even coming up with those actionable things that I think should be our next steps are part of the storytelling as well. The storytelling is everywhere, and when you really hone your ability to figure out how you should be positioning things and how you want to get your message across, you just get further in, whatever avenue it is you're trying to go.
No, and I appreciate that a lot. I think some folks are, while they recognize the storytelling is important, I don't think they necessarily internalize it and realize that you may be storytelling more than you're coding in some of these projects. And you're going to be changing that story based on the audience and based on what you need to do, the influence that you're trying to create. But building on storytelling as a theme, I'd love to talk about your book that you co-authored for a second. So adding author to your list of everything else as well. So the Mothers of Data Science. So tell me about that. Where did it spark from? What was the hope for it? And what was it like being an author?
Yeah, so I wrote that with my friend Kate Strachny, who I met on LinkedIn, and it was really an opportunity to talk to incredibly influential women in data science. So we were able to interview Kathy O'Neill, and people would ask us, how did you get an interview with Kathy O'Neill? And for those who don't know, she's the author of Weapons of Math Destruction that talks a lot about perpetuating bias through models and biased data. And it's like a fantastic book. And she's, somebody that I really look up to. And, we just had the opportunity to interview all these super influential women in data science and to talk a little bit ourselves. Because at the time, I had the experience of being called up and being like, hey, can you speak at our conference? We need more women. Or, hey, this master's degree you're getting, had you been a man with the same credentials, you would have gotten this just because you're a woman. And having the opportunity to speak to other women who were also mothers, because Kate and I are both mothers, and just talk about our experiences that we've had as women in navigating these careers, because obviously these women are also super successful. Unfortunately, we launched the book a couple months after COVID hit. And so basically COVID hit, and we were still working on it, and it was like, okay, we're just going to launch this thing because now the world of work is changing, and it's not going to go back to what it was. And all these interviews that we just did, like, it's going to look different now going forward. So at this point, it might also be, an account of how work used to be.
Well, it almost seems like there's a bit of a pendulum swing, though, because I don't know about you, but a lot of my friends and colleagues are now going back into the office in a lot of settings. And a lot of the themes of balancing your career as you're also raising a family are still prevalent, whether you're remote or not. And I would say, having been a remote employee, I've probably been a remote employee for 6 or 7 years now. My wife is as well. And we have a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old. if anything, balancing the family life with work has been more difficult in the virtual setting because that separation of church and state between your job and what you're trying to do and raising a family has been so difficult. Though I think a lot of my colleagues have seen a lot more of my kids now on camera. They always like to pop in and you see them coming out of the virtual background in the back. And my whiteboard in my office at home has been covered in artwork, which is also great.
Beautiful.
But I think a lot of parents have been wondering, how do you balance work in the personal life and being able to build that? And you have so many balls in the air right now. You are an amazing juggler that should be on Cirque du Soleil, right? You have this book, you have your company, you have the advocacy in LinkedIn, which is almost an entire family in itself, the way you were describing it. How do you balance it all? Do you have any tips or tricks? Seems like the meaning of life almost.
Yeah, I think the best advice I ever got was from my therapist. It said, no one's going to set boundaries for you. And because every once in a while I'd get resentful about like, hey, why did my boss ask me to do this thing? I wish they would have understood that. And it's like, nope, no one's going to set my boundaries besides me. Like if I want to end work at 5, like that's got to come from me. I've got to start setting the healthy boundaries from the beginning too, because once things start to go off the rails, it's much harder to get back. And then too, I think a lot of it comes back to, it's like with the imposter syndrome getting easier with experience, like it's one of these things that, I took a little step back in my career during COVID. My kids were 5 and 2 at the time. When COVID hit, and so that following fall, my daughter was in 1st grade, and I ran a pod out of my living room of little girls. 2 days a week I had them, and so I'd do contracts the other days, but because I was running this pod and I had my contracts, I stopped going on LinkedIn, and it was this, I was scared. I had put in so much effort to build up this reach, but at the same time, it was more than I could manage, and COVID was a lot for a lot of us. But I went back a couple of, it was like a whole year later. I took like almost a year off from LinkedIn, and I went back and I was able to pick up where I left off, which I was like really grateful for. It could have gone differently, but it also was like a big lesson for me in terms of like, I can do what I need to do, and like work's still going to be there, and I'm still going to have opportunities, and the people that I met, I don't all of a sudden unknow them because I'm gone for a little bit. And so I think for me, it's really been constant vigilance, actually. This is something, when I was younger, I would leave work and I would think about work all night, or I'd get an email at 7 p.m. and I would start working on it immediately because it caused me anxiety. And now I don't need to do that. If you send me an email at 7 p.m. on an evening, I can look at that and say, okay, I'm going to attend to that tomorrow. But it took training, and it took setting healthy boundaries for myself and getting in a mindset of like, I set healthy boundaries.
Right. And I think that's so important. And, I'll just start with the fact that, everyone is struggling with this, just for the folks that are watching. You mentioned a therapist earlier. I was at therapy at one point too. Especially when you're working for multinational companies, it seems like the world is never going to shut off. When I worked for Dell, it was this whole notion of the sun never set on Dell because they were in pretty much every country around the world with a few exceptions. But for me, it was that ceremony. It was being able to say from this hour to this hour was the time I was going to be cooking dinner, because I am the cook in my house. I love to cook. It's the thing I look forward to, and I'm looking forward to teaching my boys that at some point. And then being able to have that family time, and then being able to go back on in the evening when I would talk to Asia Pacific and different things like that. But especially with COVID and folks are still getting through it, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to advocate for help and things like that. And I think it's important to make that call out. So as we go into the final question I have for Kristen, as we're coming up to the Q&A portion, so if you haven't asked your questions yet, this is your chance to do that down below. and you get a chance to ask them to Kristen, myself, both of us, what kind of pizza we're ordering, whatever you'd like, you can ask that question. So Kristen, for folks that want to get into the career of analytics that may not have the background, so they may be thinking about a degree or a certification or a boot camp or a MOOC or something, what's your advice to getting into analytics?
I mean, so obviously I am a huge advocate of, and it doesn't need to be LinkedIn, but get yourself active on some platform, whether that is Reddit or Twitter or LinkedIn. There's people who talk about data on TikTok too. I don't follow it there, don't actually know how good it is. But you learn so much passively. There's so many things right now that are techniques that I would be doing in the field that I'd still be using old techniques if I wasn't hanging around the people who are talking about data all the time. There are people who are out there talking about data all the time. You can go there, you can listen for free, and you learn a ton. And you start to, after a while, you don't even necessarily see it, but you start to understand how the industry is functioning. You start to see, who's getting laid off where, who's getting jobs where, what types of industries are hiring more. And I always do, even though, I have no interest in, looking for a role, I am still often looking on Indeed. I am looking at, the types of skills that they're hiring for now. There has been a lot of changes in recent years. You start seeing things like, experiment management and the ability to monitor models in production and those types of tools. These were tools that we didn't even really see 10 years ago, so you're starting to see different tools, different types of techniques. The job the job recs that you're seeing online are literally telling you what these companies are looking for, and you have the opportunity to comb through and look at them and see, like, okay, this is the 3 or 4 skills that they have in common. How do I want to go about those? Is that a boot camp? Is that a college course? And the answer is going to be different for everyone based on what their time availability looks like, what their financially, what they're going to be able to do. And so it can look different for everyone, but I highly recommend staying on a platform somewhere and actually getting involved there, because also too, those friends that you're going to make, they may have an analytics role that comes available too, and that happens.
2 things popped into my mind as you were giving that great answer. One was around the networking, right? And when I think about my first role, it was actually through a referral, through a friend who knew I was looking for something in analytics and made a connection. So I think building your network to be able to do that is really important, and LinkedIn may be that place to do it. It may be a meetup, maybe going to meetup.com and you're just finding local professionals, post-COVID. Meetup.com is a great place to go. You can find folks with similar interests, maybe data science, maybe it's generative AI, whatever it is, and you can go meet them at a restaurant in your local city, have a conversation, build that network, find those opportunities. The other was the story. So as you're finding those skills that are popping in the employer profiles, you now know what you need to work on, but also what you need to cater your narrative to as you're applying for these roles to be competitive. And remember that you need to sell yourself in some ways. Now, granted, you also need to be interviewing the interviewer to make sure that they're defining analytics the way that you are. But it kind of brings back that storytelling aspect that we talked about, and it starts as early as when you're looking for some of these roles.
Yep,
so
absolutely.
There's a question in the chat that actually ties right into this. The market currently seems to have little or no truly entry-level jobs. And it's kind of that phenomenon where everyone says, it's entry-level, but you need 1 to 3 years of experience. How do you combat something like that?
That's a good question. I think I also didn't necessarily realize how important like interviewing skills were. I got my first couple jobs and struggled and sort of hustled and figured it out. But there's a lot to be said for sitting down with somebody and learning, how to answer behavioral questions in the STAR format, how to format your resume in a way that's really going to stand out to, or even just get past ATS, right? And get into the hands of the hiring manager or somebody who's in HR. And, even if you don't have even if you're right out of school, I personally never had an internship. But there's probably your resume is a fancy marketing tool. And so I'm a big advocate of making sure that you leverage that as efficiently as possible and really get something that is when, it gets into the hands of somebody, they say, okay, we want to speak to this person. And a lot of times people, it becomes like, there's no jobs for entry level, but also like you could have the resume that does tip the scales. Like, if it's truly an entry level role. I'm trying to, for some reason I'm blanking at the moment.
If I could add to it, and I think that's a great point. And, first thing that popped in my mind was demonstration portfolio. So being able to show that you're capable and competent in certain skills. The other thing is a lot of times the 1 to 3 years is boilerplate in some of these job descriptions. And if you can build that network and help people to see what your passions are, that you are a thinker, you have creativity, you have the storytelling, the influence, in addition to the technical skills, you can get through some of those, I'm going to call them soft requirements, though you do got to be careful that you don't get filtered out, which is where the networking will really come in, going to these meetup groups, following people on LinkedIn that are hiring managers, things like that. The other part of it is, again, that narrative becomes so important. When I think about my first job in analytics, I think the job description wanted 3 to 5 years of experience, and I had 8 months. But again, and I got the job, thankfully, which set me on a path for a lot of things. I ended up meeting my wife at that company, so my life would be very, very different now if I didn't go for that, if I just did it based on the fact that there was a minimum requirement of 3 to 5 years and I didn't have it. Well, I still pursued it. I networked, I told the story, and when I interviewed, they saw my passion. And the rest is history now, and it got me to where I am today, sitting in this chair talking to you. So I think some of it's that leap of faith we talked about at the beginning. It's the demonstration portfolio we talked about. It's the storytelling. It's the networking. It really hits on many of the themes that we have throughout. So the next question's a little bit about roles. So there was one around a BI engineer who wants to become a principal analytics engineer. And maybe if I can step back for this question. What to you is the difference between a BI engineer versus an analytics engineer? And having been somebody who watches the job market, because I want to make sure I'm preparing students, I do see analytics engineer popping up more and more. Do you have any thoughts on what the difference between those might be and how somebody might make that transition into this new thing called the analytics engineer?
Yeah, so I had actually interviewed for the analytics engineer role in 2016. And, it wasn't a super popular thing there, but at the time I was working with Adobe Analytics. I was working a lot with SQL. I was doing a little bit of R, and, I got to build models, present my analysis as an analyst, as an analytics manager, right? And now I was going to transfer into the analytics and engineer role. I ended up not taking it. It is, it's analytics. It's a lot of the similar things. However, you are much more in SQL. You are much more thinking about manipulating data for potentially consumption by analytics, and you are going to spend less time creating presentations, doing the data storytelling, a lot of the things that are really what I'm looking to do as a as a data person, and so it really wasn't for me, but that's, the difference that I saw and the things that I was personally weighing when I was thinking of making a move from analytics to analytics engineer.
Yeah, the one thing that also comes to my mind is, what is the employer defining as some of these roles? And I will tell you, if you're looking for a data analyst versus a data scientist versus an analytics engineer versus a BI engineer, you have to be very thorough in the job descriptions, because what may be an analytics engineer at one company actually looks like a business analyst at another, or a data scientist at another, or an ML engineer at another. So look through the job descriptions, figure out what skills they're looking for, and then take a truthful, honest look at yourself and say, these are the skills I have and don't. This is the gap that I'm going to try to bridge, and this is the story I can tell. And when do you feel confident that you can make that jump? When I also think about BI engineer versus analytics, the first thing that comes in my mind is somebody building reports at scale versus somebody looking at the analytics product lifecycle, which tells me that that company may also be thinking about how to make a transition from standardized reporting into more of these analytics-led decision-making, which is interesting. Like, you really want to have a conversation with people that work at that company and understand, where are they in their analytics maturity curve? Are you going in and building reports, or are you going in and starting to implement machine learning models, or are they on the forefront of the generative AI? So that's one other thing to keep in mind. I love this question. We talked about imposter syndrome earlier, and you brought this up a few times. Should you tackle imposter syndrome before landing, your first field position or your first role in analytics, or is it something that smooths out over time?
No, you go for it and just deal with the imposter syndrome. I mean, that's me. Just go for the role. Don't.
Yeah.
I honestly believe that the imposter syndrome just gets easier as time goes on, and the more that you push through, the more that you make yourself uncomfortable, the more that you grow, and the less that you deal with the imposter syndrome. And that doesn't mean that it's not going to be painful and difficult for an extensive amount of time, but it does eventually get better. But you should absolutely go for any of the opportunities at your disposal.
I'd love to give some advice to the person that asked that question too. So you've alluded to, Kristen, pretty much everyone feels imposter syndrome at some point, and I felt imposter syndrome many times in my career. I moved between doing analytics and sales to analytics and finance to analytics and supply chain. I felt imposter syndrome every single time. I then moved to academia here at WGU. I felt imposter syndrome when I came here. And the one thing that I've always done to work through it is surrounding myself with a network of people that I trust. And when I go into these roles, building that network first and foremost as my top priority. People that I trust will tell me, Joe, you're doing something foolish. Or Joe, you're going to fall on your face. Or maybe you should talk to this person. And it starts to build you confidence, because you know that you have that support system around you, whether it's virtual or in person. And every time I change roles or change industries or careers, I always start with that. And it gives me a sense of comfort that helps me to work through that imposter syndrome much more quickly. So to everyone in my network that's out there, thank you. So there's another question here. So from your perspective, how do you feel emerging technologies such as generative AI or quantum computing affect the field of data science in terms of career outlooks? And maybe I can extend this for a second to a question you and I were talking about earlier. What does this do to a role like a data analyst in the future?
Yeah, so I think that, or at least historically, it's been that any time a new tool has come out, we'd get a new tool in our corporate data science job, and we'd all worry that because it was going to make the job a little bit easier, that maybe there was going to be less work for us. And my experience has always been that it has just opened us up to work on higher value projects. So there's less ad hoc analysis, there's less, just busy work, and it allows you to create things more quickly, and even now, it'll help you to make your presentations more beautiful, your presentations worded better because of all of these large language models that we have and all of these AI generated images. I think that in general, the analytics field, because of the addition of this new technology and just the way that things have been moving, we've seen things become like a little bit more specialized. So, you may be expected to go a little bit deeper in one area or another, but there's going to be analysts, there's going to be data scientists, there's going to be machine learning engineers. They're not going anywhere, but the data wrangling and the things that take a lot of time, those have been consistently getting easier and more streamlined for the last 15 years. That's only as long as I've been around. It's probably been around longer than that, but everything has been evolving and changing this whole time, and we are in a period of more rapid growth than before. However, I think it's going to be the same. It's going to allow us to work on higher value initiatives that, before we were bogged down with more of the minutia.
No, I think that all makes a lot of sense, and I'm definitely encouraged about the career outlook from the data analyst on up. I do think the one thing that'll probably become a little bit more prevalent are some of those soft skills, the business influence skills, the strategic influence. Because to your point, as some things with data wrangling and cleaning and automation become a little easier, where a lot of our analysts and data scientists and analytics professionals are going to spend their time is influencing the business to change how they work, which means you're going to see things like process engineering pop back up again. You'll see more things with Six Sigma probably start to come back. Change management will be rampant because, again, you're changing business processes, you're changing roles. But I don't think, to your point, any of these roles are going to go away. They're just going to evolve and become a lot more knowledge-oriented versus some of these repetitive tasks that folks may have been assigned to do in the past. So the last question that I have, and this is one other that we talked about earlier, and we'll end with this. We talked about starting careers in analytics, but some folks may be wondering, should I start in a remote environment or should I start in an in-person environment? Are there trade-offs, pros, cons? Do you lean one way or the other? What are your thoughts on that?
There is absolutely a trade-off. So there is a massive benefit to being in an office, and I work remote. I plan on working remote for the foreseeable future. But in the beginning of my career, I was in an office and I was able to see how operations worked with marketing and how the whole org was structured and how things worked. And when you are sitting at home behind a computer, you just don't get that whole picture view that you get when you're actually sitting in the office. And so that doesn't necessarily mean that you should work in an office forever. And if the company that you're going to work for is a startup, I'd say then it's actually not as important because startups they work their own ways anyways. But if you're going to work for a large enterprise, I think that there's real value in being on site for a year or two to understand sort of the office politics and how everything works, because it will benefit you later on in your career to understand how that all functions.
I think that's great advice. And for the folks that are watching that may not be able to start their career in the office, I do think it's possible that you can succeed remotely. It's just a little bit more challenging. It's a different set of muscles. So for example, I've been remote now, I think I said 6 or 7 years. I set up virtual coffee chats with people, virtual water cooler time. I intentionally go out there to network with people to recreate that experience that you would have. But to Kristen's point, you start to miss some of those larger ecosystem things that are happening. It's doable, so don't feel discouraged if you can't take an in-person role. Just know that it's a different set of muscles that you're going to need to work, and there are blogs and advice that are out there on how to be effective doing it. And to Kristen's point, I'm remote now fully as well. I'm usually in Boston, Massachusetts. Today I'm in Salt Lake City with you all. But I love working remote. It gives me more time with my family, more flexibility, and for global companies, it's a real leveler. if you're talking to somebody in Asia Pacific versus in California versus Massachusetts, you're all on the same screen together. So to your point earlier, trade-offs. So my friends, that is going to wrap us up then. So at this point, I just want to say thank you, Kristen, for your time, for the insights, for the stories, for the advice, and just being your authentic, passionate self. It's been an absolute pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much.
So folks, we've been joined by Kristen Kehrer, who is an AI developer advocate, founder of Data Moves Me, author, and just a kick-butt superwoman. I can't wait to see you all for episode 11 of the Dean's Fireside Chat series in data analytics. You'll be seeing that hosted by Dr. Eric Legale this coming September. We have an amazing guest from Lego who's going to be joining us. So check out the IT events page here at WGU if you'd like to see that in the future. Kristen, thanks again. Everyone who watched, thank you. Have a great evening.